We're just waiting to get started as people enter into the session. You see the numbers still going up. Thanks for joining us today. And as you're entering, please feel free to leave a hello in the chat. Let us know where you're joining us today from. Okay, it is 1:45 p.m. here in Houston, which is where I am and where our presenters are as well. So we're going to go ahead and get started as folks are coming in. Thank you so much for joining us for this session. My name is Veronica Arellano Douglas, and I will be moderating this session today. I am very glad to welcome Lee Hilyer, who is the current interim executive director of the University of Houston Clear Lake Library, as well as Susan Garrison, who is Director of Access Services at Rice University. Before I turn things over to them and we get started, I just want to mention a few logistical items. Let's see here. Okay, so if you have any questions for the presenters, please do use the Q&A feature. There'll be about 10 to 15 minutes for the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. This session is being recorded. Captions are available by clicking on the live CC button at the bottom of your Zoom window. And we do ask that you use the chat for general comments or technical issues. We'll also be adding some links into the chat as relevant. One is for collaborative resource sharing. So if you think of a related reading, podcast, video, or something else, please share it with us in Calm's recommended resources shared Zotero. We also want to share the link for our code of conduct. And that way, if that is needed, there's a link to both the code of conduct as well as the reporting form. And with all of that said, I am going to turn things over to our presenters. So thanks, Susan. Thanks, Lee.
Thanks so much, Veronica. So I'm just going to give a little mention about the land tenure program. At Rice, our lands were once a place of meeting and exchange by a number of indigenous peoples. And although the university does not have an official land acknowledgement statement, personally, my closest connection is the one I have every day with a team member who's part of the Sac and Fox Nation. She works as a paraprofessional, and I help mentor and support her career goals to complete her MLS degree. She has one more year to go and potentially return to Iowa to manage a tribal museum. So today, Lee and I are going to share with you our experiences on how managers can support their teams after the death of a colleague. And during the pandemic, Lee and I both were leading patron-facing staff, and there was plenty of stress and anxiety about returning to in-person work, not to mention working with others outside of the group. And during this time, both of us also lost team members through death. And we'll talk about how we led our teams through these situations, which were already quite anguishing. So if you've never experienced this situation at work, we hope you'll find some takeaways from our narratives. Or if you have experience in this area, we hope that you'll join in sharing your knowledge. So when we're talking about death, we have to look at how this affects the individual who has just received the information that a person close to them has died. And what invariably surfaces is Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's 5 stages of grief. Now, more than 50 years after she published her theories, we're still using her DABDA model of denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance as the stages that an individual goes through after experiencing the death of someone they're close with. Now, there are several other models that expand or contract this theory with 4 stages, 7 stages, 8 stages, even 12 stages. However, most of them include some key pieces of Kubler-Ross's model, although the process of grief is not necessarily linear. So by a show of hands or using your reaction icon on the bottom of your Zoom screen, any emoticon you like, how many of you have lost an active team member at your library? Yep, quite a few. Okay. So quite a few of you are familiar with some of these stages then, obviously. The first stage, denial. After learning about a death, it's really easy to see how we quickly can move to a state of denial as the message we hear or read about becomes distorted by noise, psychological noise that blocks that message from being fully communicated to us and moves us to a place of shock, denial, numbness, which can last for a short while or even much longer. And then from this state, we can find ourselves feeling angry or remorseful, wondering what could we have done for this event not to have happened, even though we know that that's not logical. How could this have happened? Why this person? Why now? This is a really heavy period that's physically exhausting and emotional. And then once we've raged or regretted this situation, we might move toward a more mellower, more reflective positioning. And I saw this with several staff who were much older than the staff member that we lost. They would call me and ask, how could they have died so young? I'm so much older than them. Why wasn't it me? And again, these aren't logical things, but they're normal and and just readily happen through the whole process. And then it's really hard not to fall into the next stage of depression. Your mind won't stop replaying conversations in your head because this event is front and center in your brain. And as a manager, you're the middleman between HR, IT, public affairs, your staff, and then the family of the deceased. And it's very hard to keep from falling into this state because you're deeply, deeply saddened, but dealing with so many moving pieces that at times you're not processing things normally. And oftentimes, when you leave work or shut down your laptop for the day, everything hits you at once. You can't sleep, you lose your appetite, you don't have a desire to do the things you normally would, and you frequently can't imagine just soldiering on like nothing's happened. However, at the end, there hopefully is acceptance, right? Although there's no prescribed amount of time that someone reaches this state. And for some, it may be hard to ever fully accept that a loved one is gone. They may set up memorials, continue to make phone calls to old numbers, replay old phone messages, and update social media as if the deceased person is still very much alive. And let me just pause here and ask in the chat box, what other stages do you feel might be missing here? And Veronica, I'm going to rely on you for this.
Okay, I'm taking a look.
I don't see any messages, and I'll just continue on then.
Yep.
So at this point, I'm going to pass things along to Leaf so that he can share his narrative, and then I'll come back and share mine.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining us. I'd like to introduce you to Frances Sanchez, who was our reserves and weekend manager. I worked with her for about 17 years. She was actually one of the first people that I met outside of the search committee when I started at the library. During the pandemic, she was diagnosed with cancer and underwent treatment in 2021 and stayed with us. Frankly, she worked probably more than she should have, but she kept going day to day until about mid-May of last year when she entered into hospice. And then she finally passed away on May 27th of last year. So just about a year ago. Next slide, please. So the first days after the funeral, of course, are always tough, and they were tough for us as well. It took them about a week to sort of arrange the funeral, and all of the staff that worked with her, all of our direct department staff attended the funeral. Though it wasn't considered mandatory, everybody was very fond of Frances, and we all wanted to be there to support the family. When we started back to work after the funeral, and certainly after her death, we held some moments of silence during our staff meetings. We met weekly on Wednesdays, and probably for several months, we started out with a moment of silence for Frances. The family came to clean out her desk, and then the staff did some additional cleaning and collecting of personal materials. I personally found it a shock to come back to, because I'd actually been out of town when this happened, and to come back and to see her desk so bare. So prepare your staff for that if the family does come and clean the desk out. Sort of prepare the rest of your staff for that. The family collected all the things that belonged directly to Frances. She was a big UH fan and a big Oilers fan, actually, and had lots of swag decorating her desk. So it really was a shock to sort of see it bare. The family did leave behind some things, and we eventually boxed those up. But we also got their permission for the things that remained. If any staff member wanted to take a small memento, she collected pins and flashlights and other kinds of conference swag. And so we all were able to select something with the family's blessing that we could remember Frances by. We also sent cards to the family, signed by both the immediate department staff as well as the entire library staff. We circulated numerous cards. And we planted memorial trees in her honor, as a lot of people do. But we did want to do more. So next slide, please. So we asked the family if we could hold a campus-wide celebration of life at a later date, and they said yes, which we were very pleased by. On the left, you can see the invitation that we made that shows Frances's UH spirit. On the right, at least looking on my screen, you can see all of the family members that attended. There were about 60 some odd total people who attended the celebration of life, and over half of that was her family. And we really did appreciate that. She was known far and wide on campus for the work that she did. So this is one way that you can sort of help your staff and help the library staff in general. We have 150 some odd people at the Anderson Library. And not all of those, of course, attended her direct funeral. And we also wanted to provide an opportunity for people outside of the library to participate as well. So one of the things you'll want to remember, should this hopefully never happen to you again, is that particularly in Frances's case, course reserves was something used by a lot of faculty. So a lot of faculty knew Frances and were good friends with her and good colleagues with her. But they didn't get our library listserv and didn't get the information. So we had to make an effort to identify the faculty that she'd worked with quite closely and break the news to them as well. We also made an effort to let her former colleagues, people who'd retired, and in particular our student workers. Frances was also our weekend manager and spent a lot of time working directly with student workers for many years. And she kept tabs on all of her sort of mini kids that graduated and went off into the world. So we used social media as well to try and inform all of the people who we felt needed to know that Frances had passed away. and also to invite them to this celebration of life. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Lee. So I'm going to tell my story, and my story begins in September of 2021 on what I thought was just a normal work from home day. And then I got a phone call saying Huey's dead. And at that moment, that psychological block came in. I couldn't process what I was hearing. I just remember screaming, no, 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 over and over again, as if saying that would erase what I just heard. I cried, I screamed, I could not accept it. This was a young man who had just turned 31 years a few days before, and he was not expected to be at work because he was with friends in Miami for a celebration birthday weekend, but he never made it to the airport. His last words to his supervisor were, "I'm going on vacation. I'll see you next week." Originally from New Orleans, he and his parents relocated to Houston after Hurricane Katrina, and he would often return to New Orleans for family events and then bring back all sorts of goodies to share with staff, including incredibly ornate necklaces from Mardi Gras and amazing pralines. He was soft-spoken, extremely polite, and was a fantastic conversationalist. When he worked our front desk area, people just enjoyed him so much. They said, "Please don't move him on and don't promote him because we want him to stay in this spot." But he was so good in so many things that he did eventually get moved to a higher position. He was incredibly reliable, sharp-witted, and he had the most can-do attitude. And he stood in as Stacks, building services, and front desk supervisor when his supervisor was out. And he had been with us at that point for 3.5 years, way too short of a time for such a promising young person. So at that point, I realized I had to pull myself together because I couldn't just sit there at home and grieve by myself. I had lost a wonderful employee, but I needed to get into work fast, and I needed to inform my 3 teams. I didn't want anyone on the teams hearing about this loss from a third party or through the grapevine, and I had to tell them myself. And before heading to campus, what I did was I called an emergency meeting with everyone that was in the library. And now remember, this was September of 2021, and we had a little bump in the road called COVID. And when our fall 2021 incoming freshman class came together for orientation in August, their getting together set off a rise in infections, which pushed many people back to work from home again. So at that point, I didn't have all of my 21 team members in the library, but what I did was I gathered the folks that were there, and we met in our largest study room. And I don't even recall sitting down. I stood there and told them the reason I brought them there was to let them know their coworker had passed overnight. And there was complete silence. And I looked at them and I broke down again. And Huey's supervisor completely lost it. And we hugged each other and cried in front of everyone. Talk about authentic. It doesn't get more real than that, right? So this was the first time I had dealt with a direct death on my team. I had dealt with grieving staff who had lost family members, approving their bereavement time, checking with them to see how they were doing. I attended viewings, but this hit much, much closer to home. And I didn't know what I didn't know, right? So for one thing, I didn't know that I would turn into a mini public office Office of Public Affairs, becoming the go-to person for the family, for HR, for the entire library staff, and for even our own campus's Office of Public Affairs. So that day, I began talking with the family, inquiring about details for any type of services the family intended to hold, so I could create an e-blast to send to all staff. And this was extremely hard. Huey was an only child. This young man was this whole family's world, so conversations were incredibly emotional. I gently asked, did the family want to come and gather any belongings, like Lee? But Huey traveled light. He brought everything with him in his backpack, and he left nothing at work. So it was a very weird feeling, not having anything to return to the family, like he was erased. And then HR contacted me to obtain address information and other particulars for the deceased staff member's family. And then it was the Office of Public Affairs wanting me to help them write up an article on the staff member and interview me to create a really lovely campus memorial for him. So there was a lot going on in just that one day. And during this whole time, which again, like I said, literally was the same day I received this news, staff members started openly grieving. All right. Some had a hard time keeping things together at the circulation desk. So we asked staff from other departments to step in. We put students on the desk. We allowed staff time to take off, at work, or we just allowed them to sit in their cubicles if that's what they chose to do and just decompress from this horrible nightmare. So I reached out to HR and asked how we could help our library family through this difficult time. They were coming to me asking for all kinds of, information on the individual. And I thought, hey, I've got to ask for something back. So of course we have our EAP services, the Employee Assistance Program. However, I wanted something more tangible and readily accessible. So they connected me with a mental health agency, UT Health, that we work with in our very large and linked medical community. And I set up a grieving session for all library staff. Many attended this and shared their feelings, remembrances, tears. We had boxes of Kleenex all over the room. And it was a great coming together of the entire library family who might otherwise have grieved alone or not even been able to do that. Now, I have an aside to this, okay? So this is kind of the funny part of the presentation. During the fall of 2020, our building was empty, except for my 3 patron-facing teams. There really wasn't any other department that came into the library. A few individuals from other areas of the library, such as tech services and cataloging, might come in and pick up some work, but then they would leave again. So the campus was very deserted. It was a really weird feeling. During normal times, we have an abundance of wildlife on campus, particularly squirrels. Our campus coffee house's mascot is even a squirrel. And the squirrels are very acclimated to people, and they'll come up and practically eat out of your hand. Huey was very much an animal lover. He had bearded and Komodo dragons, cats, snakes, you name it. So one day he showed me that he got a little nip from one of the squirrels that he was hand feeding on campus, and I just laughed at him. And okay, I said it before, our building is very old. The main part of it was built in 1947, and there are lots of gaps. So in the fall of 2020, my staff began hearing scratching noises in the ceiling tiles. And then this. Can you tell what that is? A raccoon. Yeah. He would pop his head out occasionally to see what was going on at the circ desk. Of course, there was nobody else in the building except for my team and no customers, no users, but we had a raccoon checking in on us. So I called our building manager, and we thought it would be as easy as having, maybe our police department or the city's animal control department come over and help us. But it turned out it wasn't that easy. This raccoon was smart. He came and went, and staff could, mysteriously report hearing scratching noises, sometimes late, but we couldn't figure out how the animal got in or out. So in the winter of 21, a pest control company came out and set 17 traps. Several have-a-heart traps, but none of it worked. This raccoon was elusive and smart, and he had friends. So this game of hide and seek went on for months during the pandemic. And finally, in the summer of 2021, our raccoon had become well-read and worldly and wasn't just poking its head out of the vents. They were brazenly walking the stacks with friends. On Tuesday, August 17th, which was a fairly quiet pandemic summer day, our library turned into a hub of action. And Huey, ever the animal whisperer, helped corral both raccoons with the help of his supervisor and some makeshift traps using a couple rolling book baskets. This was hysterical. People took video of it and they took pictures and they shared this picture with me, and it's priceless. The raccoons were taken to a park a short distance from our campus, literally a couple of miles from our entrance doors. And a few weeks later, on September 21st, 2021, I honored Huey at our quarterly staff meeting for his help with this incident. And then sadly, 2 days later, he was gone. So one staff member who's very artistic asked if they could draw something to memorialize Huey. And this team member was having a very, very difficult time grieving. And I thought it would be helpful for them to have an outlet to express their feelings. So this is the beautiful work that they created. And we have several button makers at work, and I asked them to create buttons to distribute to staff, family, and friends while working in the library and also at the services. So we had the picture framed and presented it to the family at the viewing. And our public affairs department also ran a beautiful memorial article alongside of this for the campus community. And these were just tiny steps toward grieving and healing. The viewing. This is such an emotional event and so difficult on so many levels. Clearly, no one is at the acceptance level at this point. It's not just a struggle to find the right words, but it's a personal struggle to decide whether to attend something so deeply personal, raw, and real. Several staff stated they just couldn't bring themselves to something so emotional. However, many staff did attend. The viewing was open casket, and for many, this was just too difficult to see someone they had worked alongside just a few short days ago. Some couldn't enter the room. There were so many young people that family, friends, staff, and acquaintances filled several rooms. Meeting with family also was very hard. There are never going to be any right words. It's going to be messy, uncomfortable, and you have to sit with those feelings and be okay. But it matters for you as a manager to show up for the family and provide that support with your presence. They need to know how much that person's life mattered. They need the stories to keep the memories alive. And then life moved on, or sometimes didn't. We couldn't take Huey's name off our meeting invites, off the work schedule, or off the list of staff for quite a while. Although we were in the midst of a busy fall semester, we couldn't rehire his position. It just didn't feel right rushing things. I told his supervisor to take her time, let me know when she was ready to rehire. No rush, we'll get by. When she rehired, with tears in her eyes, she said to me, "They're not like my Huey." And with a lump in my throat, I said, "No one will be like him." To this day, I still have his number on my phone, and so does his supervisor. Most of us have his photo, raccoon button, and prayer card on our walls and mirrors. And I continue to reach out to his mom and dad to check in on them and see how they're doing. We're never going to forget him. As mentioned, a few items that managers take responsibility for are communicating with staff, being the liaison between family and campus departments, being the HR liaison and providing contact information, sharing information with public affairs, creating opportunities for healing and mental health wellness, and being the library liaison with other departments, including campus IT or campus security. As a manager, what other responsibilities have you taken on during a time of grief at your library? And put those comments in the chat or the Q&A, either area. Veronica will pitch them to us.
It's a bit of a quiet chat right now. Just want to encourage folks to leave comments.
I see something from Amy in the chat. If you want to read that one off.
Oh, sure. Didn't see that one just now. Okay. Yes, this is from Amy. If one of your team members ever receives notification of a death of an immediate family member while they are at work and they drive to work, please do everything you can to make arrangements for someone to drive the staff member home in their car so they don't have to worry about retrieving their car later. This is coming from her personal experience, and thank you for sharing that, Amy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've had team members contact us and let us know that that they have just experienced something traumatic, and whether that's a death or whether that's something else. I just always tell them to please stop what they're doing, especially if they're driving, and just think about, do they really need to come to work? Are they in the state of mind that is safe for them. Because if it's not, then just go back home and take care of themselves and whatever the situation calls for.
Let's see, we have 2 more comments in the chat. This is from Kim. One of my colleagues, as a manager, had the difficult task of helping the son of a deceased colleague clear out an office space that had been occupied and personalized over for a long, long time. And then Jackie states, we had a colleague pass away who was estranged from his family. Library colleagues found a new home for his cats and also wrote a local obituary for him.
Yeah, we had nothing to clean out. Lee has the opposite situation where they came in and cleared everything out. So
Yeah, that was a really tough part of it is, having to, because, her desk area was a riot of color and fun things and pictures drawn from our grandkids and so forth. And I think to this day, I'm at a different library currently, but to this day, I don't think we have. Nobody has. We're fortunate we didn't need the space. We've left her desk as it empty as it was. And we won't be able to do that forever, but I think that's been good for the staff there to continue to get used to that. The space that she sort of left behind.
Veronica, anything else in chat?
Yeah, I was just gonna check in
Sure.
to see if you all were open for one more comment.
Absolutely.
So this is from Tim. One thing I have done as a manager was to make sure coworkers have the ability to attend services if they want to, especially by driving, since students may not have access to vehicles.
Absolutely. That's a great suggestion, Tim. Yeah, and we did a lot of carpooling, especially we have some staff that don't even drive. And so people got together in groups and attended the services. His remains were put to rest back in New Orleans. So a lot of people couldn't come, and that was actually like a month later. Yeah, I did attend that. I went out to New Orleans for the funeral. I think that the funeral is you've got a lot of family, and Lee can attest to this, right? It's just a different feel. The viewing seems to be more of a community event. Like it's more family and friends and outside and acquaintances and so forth. Where the funeral seems to be a lot more close knit. I could be wrong on that, but.
Thank you, Susan and Lee.
I'm going to continue on with slides then.
Great.
All right, thanks. So throughout this whole time, although you might not feel up to it, an important piece to remember is to take good care of yourself too as a manager, okay? Understand this is going to be a very challenging time to manage, concentrate, just get through the day. Be really kind to yourself. Sit with your feelings, get rid of imagined guilt, get plenty of rest, eat well, exercise, meditate, journal, talk things out with family, friends, or a counselor. Do whatever it is that you need to kind of de-stress. You can't manage your team if you're a mess. Any other suggestions on great self-care activities during this time? And put that in the chat too. I like that, hugs. Oh yes. Oh, there was a lot of hugging going on. And you can people may have asked, is it okay to to have a hug or get a hug? But yeah, you had to acknowledge those feelings and all that emotion that's going on at that time. So how can you support your staff? Number one, be authentic, right? Remember that you're mentoring many staff members who may never have experienced death so personally, or on the flip side, this event may trigger emotions and behaviors from staff who have experienced death in a very traumatic way. And as HR reaches out to you for contact information, remember they're your partner. Reach out to them to help support you and your team with EAP services, other mental health counseling, anything that they can offer. Find and offer every resource that you can to your staff to get through this. Consider setting up an opportunity for all library staff to come together, to grieve, and to celebrate the staffer who has died. And communicate. Make sure to keep your staff informed quickly with relevant factual information. Don't rush to replace this person. Let the rehiring happen organically. And be flexible with staff scheduling. Understand that the grieving process is not a one-size-fits-all. Again, it's not linear. What you offer may not be accepted by others, and you have to be okay with that. Everyone grieves differently. Lee, I'm going to pitch it to you.
Sure, I got it. Be mindful of the power of space. I've talked about this a lot. Suddenly a space is empty. I mean, you probably all have this at your own places where your staff sits in the same exact seat at the conference table during meetings. And, you know, Francis had the corner chair, and nobody sat in that chair, and probably still doesn't. One of the things that we did was to gather old photos to remember the good times. We have had a long tradition at our library of putting together sort of slideshows, or in the past photo albums of people as they've retired. So we had a nice deep trove of old photos that we could pull out. And we also talked to the family as well, and they sent us some really great pictures of Frances, and even a short video of her riding a mechanical bull, probably about 6 months into her chemotherapy. So, you know, those are good memories that I have. You definitely want to allow colleagues outside of the library, your faculty, your staff that work in other departments on campus that collaborated with that staff member to participate. And recognize that grief will surface unexpectedly. One of our staff did a memorial video, and Francis's favorite song was John Denver's Country Road, and I will never be able to listen to that song again without thinking of Francis. So, you know, it happened to come on the radio 3 or 4 months ago, and while I was driving. And so, you know, recognize that, you know, a year, 2 years, 3 years down the road, that grief will surface. And yes, as a leader, it's okay to be vulnerable with your staff. You have to be strong to help do the things, the HR, the logistics and all of that stuff, but it's okay to express your own grief as well. Because if they see you doing it, then they're able to be comfortable doing so as well.
Thanks, Lee. And now we're going to open it up to you, and we're going to open it up to Veronica to go through all the chat, all the Q&A and everything else. What struggles have you faced with grieving the loss of an employee, or with managing staff who are grieving, or managing while grieving yourself for maybe a family member or a close, you know, acquaintance? And then if you've got some great tips to share on how you've managed your teams, or how you've dealt with this yourself, we would love to have you share that as well. I just wanted to share that I've uploaded our presentation slides, as well as a host of about 6 documents in the OSF. So they're there for helping with journal prompts, to help with grieving. There's a big list of resources there. There's also material that UT Health shared with me and that they gave me permission to share with you for the conference. So all of this is there for your reference and your resources to use should this come up for you. All right, Veronica, take it away.
Yeah, thank you both for sharing your stories. I also worked with Lee and Francis, and the thing I always remember is that Francis made every single person in the library a handmade Christmas card every year, and that was just really indicative of the person that she was. Susan and Lee, if you are open to questions, I'm happy to pull some from the Q&A.
Yep, that would be great.
So one question is, do you have any thoughts about how to handle continued staff grieving? We lost someone in 2019 and there was a lot of loss and grief still felt. But besides listening respectively, the question asker says they're not really sure what the best response is. And relatedly, Megan asks, how to gently introduce to newer colleagues who may not have known the deceased that others are still grieving.
Lee, you want to take that one?
Sure, I'll try.
Okay.
What for the group that's still grieving, couple things. If you haven't been able to do so, even though it's several years down the road since they passed away, yeah, maybe you can organize a sort of formal celebration of life. One of the things that we did that I still have access to is we invited people to share stories about Francis, good stories that we could then hold on to. And we had about 40 or 50 people submit funny stories or, touching things that they remembered. Perhaps there's like a process that you can go through to kind of memorialize and bring that sort of buried stuff back up so that people can sort of let it go in some fashion. I'm no counselor. I don't know for sure, but that's the first thing that occurs to me is to formalize the occasion, to sort of plan for it and give people an opportunity to share good memories and have a good cry and, have something to eat and kind of mingle. And then to kind of put, to sort of mark another stage. That because those folks don't want, the folks who passed away, they don't want us to be grieving forever. They want us to move on. They want us to do, to continue doing the work that we do. So that's one example. I can't remember what the other part of the question was.
The other part of the question was how to introduce new colleagues who may not have known the deceased, that let them know that others are still grieving.
Yeah.
We didn't hire too many people after in 2020. We had kind of a stable group that didn't change much except for the loss of this one employee. So it wasn't until probably about 2022 that we started hiring a few people. And I think that they, realized that there was, something that, something traumatic that had gelled the team together. And I believe it was this young man's supervisor who kind of shared with, and she's got like a memorial at her desk, a whole shelf, full of memories of him. And so people know, they just know coming in, that there was somebody special that worked here. And yeah.
Thank
And then
you.
the other piece about lingering grief is we've had some staff who've had some traumatic losses in their life during the pandemic that were outside of the library, and they've just had a very, very hard time. It's not been just the 1 or 2 years, it's, moving into 3, 4 years. We've given them the space and the time to set up personal sessions with outside counseling, and been very flexible with their schedules to accommodate for that, to make those appointments. So that's important.
Thank you. This, and speaking of time, this question is from another anonymous attendee. I'm curious if you have any suggestions on what to do if your administration won't approve time for the majority of staff to attend the services for a deceased coworker. The one time I experienced it, administration said desks still needed to be staffed.
Well, go ahead, Sue.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I think that as a manager, you've got to find some workarounds if your administration is going to be difficult about, letting people take time for services. You just have to make it a priority because it's important for their mental health, right? And you need to do whatever you need to help your staff get through this time together. And if that means reaching out to some departments, and for us, it was reaching out to departments that really didn't want to come in, that they had been working from home, for over a year, and so they didn't, weren't feeling very comfortable, especially with the spike that happened in the fall of 2021. But they did it because we just said, we need you, and we need the help, and we want to attend these services, and so they just did.
Well, and sort of to add on to that is, one of the reasons why we wanted to do the celebration of life was because now all of our department staff were fortunately able to attend the funeral, but it was on a Saturday, and we weren't working that day, or we had student workers that day instead. But like Sue said, to recognize it's part of their mental health, and we knew we wanted to afford the whole library and the campus community that knew Francis another. We wanted another opportunity as well. Because I could tell you kind of funny stories about the funeral, but we won't talk about those right now. But we knew that we wanted, because Francis was so important to us, we wanted that opportunity to be able to celebrate her and to grieve in our own way.
Thank you, Lee. Thank you, Susan. We have another question from an anonymous attendee. How should we handle requests for bereavement leave when the loss is not public? And this person is specifically mentioning a miscarriage and kind of struggling for asking for time off because of the nature of the loss and the privacy.
So are they communicating with their supervisor about this? And I guess it, if they are communicating with their supervisor, they might want to at least share it with them and ask to keep it personal. And I can't imagine any organization in this day and age saying you can't, take off time for a bereavement of a miscarriage. Yeah. I'd have to change jobs.
I actually was in this situation some years ago, and fortunately they had plenty of sick leave, and so that's just what we called it. It was nobody's business but theirs. And then at our place, after 3 days, you're supposed to have a doctor's note. But we were able to, they came in on the weekends or they came in at night to pick up some hours and do some work when other people were not there, so that they didn't have to face directly other staff. And then, they chose later to disclose that information, but at that point it was, let's call it sick leave. Let's see what, and let's work a schedule, so that you can come in when you feel like that you're able, or that if you need privacy, that you come in at off hours when other staff are not there.
Thank you for sharing that, Lee. Another question is, how do you prepare the person who takes the position of the person who passed away when you do move forward to fill it? And Mary also comments that this is a situation that they are in at the moment and would appreciate any advice that you could give.
Well, I'll let Sue answer in a sec, but for us, we were fortunate that we had another colleague in the department who had been working with Frances off and on to take care of course reserves. So she was able to take over. And we chose not to fill that position. Actually, we repurposed it for something else. But we chose not to fill that position because we had somebody who we could promote into the job who had been working with Frances side by side. So it was a plus for us, that we didn't have to train anybody and that we didn't have to face that particular situation.
And for us, so this person came from a big group of stacks, building services, front desk of about maybe 6 or so people in that group. And it's funny, when I came here 7.5 years ago, it was a very stable group of very mature staff members who had been here at the university for anywhere from 10 to 25 years. So there wasn't any movement. And then then there just seemed to be a turnover. There was a retirement, and person moved to another department, and then this whole young group started to form in this area where it never had been. It had always been just kind of very much older age group of people that worked in this area. And so the younger people, they were all in their 20s and 30s. It was really refreshing to see, and this particular person that we lost, he was just kind of like, he was the ringleader to, get everybody talking and get everybody involved in doing stuff, and just had a lot of life to him. He was on our activities and events committee, setting up and helping out with picnics and different parties and things like that. And it was really nice to see. And then when he passed, it was kind of interesting because there were a couple of people, there were actually a couple of hires that happened. And so it wasn't a natural kind of like a real focus on that feeling of replacing him. And some of them didn't stay very long, maybe 4 months, 6 months. So there was a high turnover, and it was almost kind of hard to remember, when it was just that first newly formed 20, 30 something year old group. So, people, some of the people that came into the group recently, they were mindful about, what had happened in 21, but there was just kind of a different take because there was a lot more movement. There wasn't that that group that had stayed, that had that longevity. So a little bit different.
I'm actually going to take a question that came through the chat for she asks, you mentioned imagined guilt, and there was a comment in the chat about a guilt phase. Could you talk more about imagined guilt and your experience with it, how to deal with it?
Yeah, sure. You know, there's imagined and then there might be real guilt, right? And there might be something like, you know, that you had maybe had a very difficult conversation with an employee, and maybe things didn't turn out the way the conversation didn't turn out the way that you had planned. And maybe that's the real guilt, right? Maybe that's you feeling guilty about, you know, wow, I was too hard on this person. And, you know, that might be something that you need to talk out, to, you know, talk through with someone. But, you know, the imagined guilt, and I had it. I had it, you know, it was kind of like, gosh, I wish I had done this, or I wish I had done that. You know, 2 days before I had my quarterly meeting with the whole, you know, with as much of the team as there was during the pandemic. And, you know, why didn't I do this for the person? Or, you know, certain things that you know, eh, could, could I have done anything really? No, I couldn't. It's imagined, you know, I couldn't have, you know, stopped his passing, you know, that, I mean, you know, there were things, could I have made different decisions? No, it really wouldn't have made, but you know, you play these things through your mind, you know, and it just makes you a little crazy. You just think about, you know, oh, I should have said this, or I should have done that. Shoulda, woulda, could have, you know, it's not going to change how things are or what you could do. And so, you know, showing that outpouring of love and support for the family and being there for them, and going to everything, and, you know, having your presence there is just the most important thing, to honor their memory and to do celebrations like Lee was talking about, you know, bring the campus together, because if you don't do it, nobody's going to do it. Um, and that's just something that's lost. And, you know, even if it is like the one person that had the question, even if it is 3 or 4 years after the fact, if you have the desire to do it, and there's enough of an interest, I mean, even if it's just a couple of people that get together that show up for this thing, at least it's that couple of people that show up, you know, and you can invite the family. You can, you know, do that. I think Lee, you guys invited the family, right?
Yes, and I looked through, there was a question about seeking permission, and we did. We were in touch with them a few weeks, you know, a couple of weeks after the funeral, and then we said, you know, we would like to do this, and when you're ready, you know, let us know. And so we Francis died in May, and but we didn't have the celebration until November. So we gave the family space, and we said, you know, let us know if when you're ready to start planning it. And they contacted us probably in September. And it took us, you know, it takes a while to plan stuff. So yeah, we settled on a date in November.
There's some good comments in the chat too, and my heart breaks for Amy, who had the you know, the guilt, and that's really great that that the family reached out. And Veronica, if you wanted to share any of that stuff that's in there, a lot of good stuff.
Yeah, we just having a lot of comments from folks who are really expressing a need for closure, right? So, you know, really recognizing the employee who passed is really important for others at work who are grieving their loss. Some not great stories of how managers handled loss for employees, which we can all learn from as well. And yeah, Lisa, hello.
I love that comment from Amy. She said, I felt guilty that my staff member insisted on working on site 1 day a week, just like everyone else. And when we reopened in the fall of 2020, because I knew she was sick, I wish I had insisted that she stay home and work remotely 100%. There's that imagine guilt. You bring it on, even though you're trying to treat everybody the same on the team, right? And then she says her husband told me at the funeral how much it meant to her coming in to work 1 day a week, as it was a respite for her from her illness, which was not public, and that helped with her guilt. Yeah, that's important.
Well, we've got about a minute left, and I want to leave time for Susan and Lee to.
Veronica, I see another anonymous question in the chat.
Yes,
see that?
we're
Okay.
Unfortunately at just about time, and
Okay, sure.
you have to close the webinar room. I'm sorry.
Absolutely. No, but feel free to reach out to both of us. I have our contact information on there. We'd be glad to help you walk through any situation that comes up in the future or stuff that's happened in the past.
Thank you all for coming today.
Thank you both for your vulnerability and just chatting with everyone today. Thank you.
Thanks, Veronica, for your excellent moderating and going back between screens, and also Rebecca for your tech support. Awesome. Who's shutting us down?
I'll close us down. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Rebecca. Amazing.
Thanks, Rebecca.
Thank you,
Take
Lee.
care, all.